Star Wars geek girls. They're geek girls that like Star Wars. And sometimes cry.
Record. Hello and welcome to Star Wars Geek Girl. As usual, I'm here with Lizzie.
Hello.
And we have a very, very special guest today. I'm really excited to introduce E.K. Johnston, who you know as the author of Ahsoka, or the Queen's Shadow, Queen's Peril, and the new, soon coming out, Queen's Hope book about Padme Amidala.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the show.
It's awesome to be here.
So excited. Ahsoka is like my favorite Star Wars book. I actually just reread it like a couple weeks ago. I'm very excited.
Cool.
Yeah, so we just have, obviously, do you want to do you have a little blurb you want to say about anything before we start asking you a bunch of questions? Or
Not really. I think this is going to come out after Queen's Hope comes out, or around the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it comes out on April 5th anyway.
Right.
And there's going to
it'll be close.
Yeah. So there's going to be the hardcover book, and there's going to be an audiobook read by Kat Tabor. I'm sure they'll sort out the ebook links eventually. They're on it. And aside from that, I'm just like, my copy actually arrived today. So earlier there was quite a bit of crying. And I'm like, I was, you can actually see it. It's the pink one on the end there.
Oh,
That's
nice.
mine. Yeah. And so I was actually like, I was holding it in my hand and crying, and I was like, oh my God, it's a trilogy. Yeah.
It got pushed back because I remember it was going to be in the fall.
It did. It was supposed to be in November, but there was like all those shipping holdups, and in this case, it was literally on a ship. Like it was on a boat in the Pacific, like in Port of Los Angeles or wherever. And they couldn't get it off the boat, like literally could not get it off the boat. And so they did now, they have got it. And I am very excited. And they bumped it actually a bit further. There were a bunch of Disney books also on that boat. And they got bumped to January, but they bumped Queen's Hope to the other side of the High Republic books. So we had, basically it means you have a Star Wars book pretty much every month this year until August, which is fantastic.
It's very exciting.
Very good.
Lots of reading to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're all very excited. I love the first two Queen. Can I just call them the Queen's books? I feel like that's
Sure.
Yeah, sure. The Queen's book, that's what I call it. And I'm very excited for this new one, this Clone Warsy one. So the first question I have is just a little general, but like what went into the title, like Queen's Hope? Like why hope here instead of shadow or peril like the first two?
So there's kind of a funny story behind this one. I had wanted to call Queen's Peril. Originally, I had titled it Queen's Gambit. And marketing was like, we're not sure if teenagers will know what a gambit is. Because at the time it was a fairly obscure chess term. And I was like, okay. And so we tossed it around for a little while and came up with Queen's Peril. I really like it. We call the book Queen's Peril. Everything's fine. In my mind, I'm like, I'm going to talk them into Queen's Gambit for the next one. Like, that's what I'm thinking. So I start the third one. It's called Queen's Gambit. And then the television show comes out on Netflix. And all of a sudden, everybody knows what the Queen's Gambit is, to the point where I can no longer use it as the title. So it went from being like too obscure to too mainstream. So again, Jen Heddle and I just went back to like every word we could think of. And we landed on hope for a bunch of reasons. One, because it was the pandemic and we're all super depressed. Two, this is kind of the sad book. Like Queen's Peril and Queen's Shadow were, you could pretend you didn't know what was going to happen. But in Queen's Hope, I couldn't put it off anymore. I knew that there was going to be that dark cloud on the horizon, mostly because Anakin Skywalker was actually in the book this time. And so I wanted to sort of give myself something to look forward to and remind the reader that it's not all doom and gloom all the time. The book is also not doom and gloom all the time. It's just like the saddest of the three.
Well, and I feel like that's very Star Wars to have hope.
Yeah, also that. Also, it's kind of on brand for the whole thing.
Yeah, it's very, very Star Wars.
Yeah.
So obviously, without spoilers, so whenever people are listening to this, whether it's out or not, what is something you're most excited for people to see when they read the book?
Oh man, there's so many things in this book. So this is my second complete start to finish during the pandemic book. So like I started the draft during the pandemic, all of the editing, all of the publishing, all of that kind of stuff. It's the second one, and I was pretty, down about everything. And so I was like, you know what, this book is just going to be full of presents to myself. So there's a lot of like Easter eggs that I've really been looking forward to. And there's a lot of just like callbacks and even like things that I don't expect anyone else to understand, but I put in there for a reason. And one of them is something I've been working my way up to for like 5 years. And it's right at the very beginning, second page of the book. And I've been really looking forward to that forever. To be slightly less vague, I was so excited to write clones, And there's 2 clones in particular in this book. And one kind of goes around with Anakin and one kind of goes around with Padme. And like a little bit, they're not like huge characters or anything, but they're definitely there. And my nephew, aka the Tiny Hulk, is super into anybody that wears that style of armor. So like Mandalorian, Boba Fett, like all of them. He loves all of them. And he actually designed one of the clones. So he designed one of them, awesome. And I designed the other one. But it was just so much fun to finally get to write clones. It was just so much fun. That was definitely something that was on my bucket list, pun intended, was to write some clone characters.
That's so exciting. I love reading clones. I feel like we don't get to read clones that much. So yeah, I'm excited.
Physically reading the clones is also really fun because like it's the same voice for all of them, but like they all have different personalities. So it's really great. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned, earlier, like now there's like the dark cloud and Anakin is present here. So I want to ask, like, like obviously a lot has happened between Queen's Hope or Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril, and then now Queen's Hope. Like there's Attack of the Clones and a little Clone Wars in between. So like how did you approach like all that's happened to her compared to the last time you wrote her?
I think it was interesting because like the writing that I did for her, I only wrote her as like a true YA teenager once, and that was in Queen's Shadow. She was 18. She was 14 in Queen's Peril, which is kind of young for a YA protagonist, and she's 24 in Queen's Hope, which is really old for a YA protagonist. But it was nice to kind of have that bookend, and writing Peril and Hope back to back was fun because you kind of get her like at her highest point in Queen's Peril, and then like at the start of where everything starts to go pear-shaped at the end of Attack of the Clones. And so it's like her emotional high point, but it is literally all downhill from there. And so kind of getting to write without taking away from her idealism and without taking away from her optimism as things start to go wrong and spin more and more out of her control, to be the very isolated character that we see in Revenge of the Sith, which when I was little always really depressed me. And I mean, it still depresses me, but for different reasons now. And I wanted to sort of see what could have happened to this woman who had such a strong network, and then what happened to that network to get us to where she is in Revenge of the Sith.
So how does it feel to write for Padme Amidala? She's like such a cool character that like she's super strong, super smart, and like you said, she goes through all these trials and things. So like, how does it feel to add to the Star Wars universe as Padme?
It's pretty great, I won't lie. I love Padme. She's the character that kind of got me back into Star Wars. I was 15, literally the day that The Phantom Menace came out. So it was like, thanks, George. That was literally the best birthday present I could have possibly received. And it was very, like, she's kind of been the character that I've carried with me as I like became more politically aware and like became more socially aware and like all that kind of stuff. She's kind of been like the baseline for that in a lot of ways. And so getting to write her and kind of go into what she's thinking and expand her story a little bit has been absolutely fantastic. And I remember when Queen's Shadow came out, I kind of had the other two books kind of like in my back pocket. And I was like, I hope people like this because I want to write more Padme. And people did. So I got to write more Padme and it was amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've built a lot of lore for the Handmaidens and Naboo, like just for your books. Do you take any inspiration from anything that comes like to Naboo culture? Also, the Handmaidens are really cool, by the way.
They are fantastic. I think with the Handmaidens in particular, I had to be very mindful of how I was writing them. As I mentioned previously, like it was 1999, I was 15, the internet was just like starting to be a thing I was like on. And the Handmaiden fandom was this very niche, but very like strong but mighty or small but mighty thing. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't like taking too much of our like shared head canon for like 20 years when I sat down to actually put the Handmaidens together. So I used a bunch of different things to kind of decide how I was going to write them. And when it came to Naboo culture, I tried to go with what we'd seen from the movie, but be slightly more aware of cultural appropriation. And thinking about the ramifications of like what certain symbols mean to somebody from Earth watching the movie. Because I wanted, so you might notice in most of my dress descriptions, they are much more Western themed fashion, because that's what I am comfortable with. And that's what I'm comfortable with writing about. And so when it came to the culture, I really kind of leaned into the art and the music, and how that like strangely shapes the government. They don't have a minister of finance, for example. Doesn't exist. But they have two different ministers of art. Like it's ridiculous. Anyway, so, and then getting to write them too on the other side of the occupation. We actually spend quite a bit more time on Naboo in this book than we do in Queen's Shadow. So I actually got to write like more post-occupation Naboo in this book through Sashay's plotline, which was also really fun to read.
Yeah, the Handmaidens are. I just whenever I read Queen's Shadow, I'm like, I want this girl gang in my life so bad.
I think I want to speak for my dad real quick and say they are very, very cool, and he enjoys all of the characters very much.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I will say I write down their names to keep them straight. That's I'm already bad with names in books, and then they all have they all
have
and I'm like, I need a list.
they did that on purpose. They're trying to confuse you.
So. They did, and it worked. It worked.
Yep. we throw in 2 more in Queen's Hope. Now we're up to like, well, we lost 2 and then we added 2 more, and it's like all over the place. So
poor ladies. Yeah. It worked. They did a great job. So I guess, so you mentioned Padme teaming up with clones here. Obviously Anakin is in this book, but if you could write like any story where Padme teams up with any character of your choice, don't worry about the timeline, total fanfic moment, anything you want, who would she team up with?
Oh, I know it's like they actually do team up in the story, but like I will take literally any opportunity to write Ahsoka again. Like if they ever need her for anything, I hope they call me. Like I don't know what their plans are for the TV show, but I hope they call me, and like I would love to write her again. She was fantastic. She's fantastic with Padme. Their dynamic is really interesting, and I think they actually have a more similar approach to problem solving than Anakin and Ahsoka do, which is one of the reasons that Ahsoka and Anakin make a good pair, and Anakin and Padme theoretically make a good pair if they would ever talk about their feelings. I mean, like functionally, they're a great pair emotionally, but like functionally, not so much. And so I think like they have this kind of Ahsoka and Padme have this kind of approach that is really fascinating, and I love seeing them work together. And I would absolutely, in a heartbeat, write them on some bonkers Clone Wars mission.
I would read that. I vouched for that. I would say. How was, you mentioned Anakin and Padme and their everything. How was getting to write that? Because that's such a huge focus of the three movies, really.
It is.
Write it.
So you may have noticed if you read Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril that I went out of my way to not include Anakin in them. Like he's not mentioned by name in Queen's Shadow at all. And he's very minimally in Queen's Peril. And so when I wrote the first draft of this book, I got it back from Jen Heddle, and she was like, "That's great. Could you maybe put in some Anakin scenes?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, right, that guy." So like he was in the book and he's referred to a lot, but like I wasn't used to like actually putting him in scenes. And he didn't have any scenes with Padme in the first draft. So like in the first draft, he has all these scenes with literally every other character, but he doesn't have any scenes with Padme. So I kind of got to go back and write them at their most romantic. And so it's like the day of their wedding, they're having a lot of thoughts, they have a last minute adventure before they get married. It's very typical of their relationship where it's like it just doesn't stop, like life just keeps coming at them. And they're like trying to be adorable while it's happening. So every scene you have where you're like, oh, what an adorable couple, you're just like, talk about your feelings, the world is ending, and they don't. And so you kind of have this like back and forth dynamic between the reader and the book where you're like, oh, this is adorable, oh god, all the time. And that dynamic for me was really important to capture, even though it was very sad, because it is really central to their relationship. This idea that like the highest high they will ever have is the end of Attack of the Clones. And after that, it's like over the edge of Niagara Falls. So it was kind of interesting to write that dynamic and keep them happy with also having that sense of foreboding like lingering over top of them. In particular, there's one scene at the end that I went out of my way to make like as sweet and saccharine as possible, and like sometimes I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's really adorable, and sometimes I read it and I'm like, oh my god, these two. Like, what have I done?
Now I'm scared.
Oh yeah, it's one of those kinds of books. I wrote like the saddest single line I've ever written is in this book.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're hyping me up so much. I can't wait
But well, I'm sure we'll all be in tears.
I definitely will.
If you could like write a book about any other character, and I know you really like Ahsoka and stuff, but who would you focus it on?
I do have a couple of pitches in right now, so I don't want to like jinx anything. I wish with my whole heart that they would let me or Claudia write the Obi-Wan Satine book. Like I don't think it will. I don't want to be like, I don't think it will ever happen, because like it might happen, but like I just want it to be this like political thriller. Like it's marketed as a political thriller, and then you get it and it's like, surprise, it's a teen rom-com. But it's also a book about two sisters, and like everyone's like Mandalore, so all the boys buy it, and then you're like, oh, it's a story about these two girls who are on opposite sides, and like that's just kind of my dream for this book. I don't think it will ever happen, but I live in hope, to return to the theme, that someday they'll be like, do you know what we need? And we should call E.K. Johnston. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I know you've written, you don't just write Star Wars, believe it or not. So how is writing a Star Wars story different from writing your own original stories?
I think there's two main differences. The first is that I have to outline Star Wars books because the outline has to get approved. I am not by nature a person who outlines. I usually write the book by what's called the flashlight method, wherein I know what's coming like a little bit in advance, but not like super far in advance. So, but like with an outline, you do have to make an outline. And even when you look at my outlines, it's very clear that I'm still using the flashlight method, because the first part will be super detailed, and then the other parts will just get progressively less detailed until it gets to the end and it's like heist question mark. Like that's basically like how it works. Almost all of my books at some point involve heist question mark. It keeps things fresh. And so you kind of have this difference of approach. The other main difference is that when I'm writing my own books, it's a little bit more solo. When I'm writing Star Wars, especially this time, I worked with Mike Chen a little bit. I worked with the comic book guys a little bit, like just to sort of make sure we had, everything lined up. And it was like this really cool teamwork project. Mike Chen's book, Brotherhood, actually takes place pretty much at the same time, or I think it takes place like right after Queen's Hope. So we had to like nail down some timeline stuff. And then I talked with Greg Pak about the Crimson Reign in the Darth Vader comic that's currently running, that kind of stuff. And like that is not present at all in my original books. I have to do all my thinking for myself, which has its benefits, but also I do kind of like being able to sort of, brainstorm with people and work it out, which is really fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great, just Star Wars in general, very community oriented, which is super fun. Is there any like because Padme, she does show up in a lot of different things across Star Wars. Is there any particular like moments or episodes that you drew from for writing her? In this book in general.
Well, I think like most obviously it's probably the episode, for Queen's Shadow anyway, it was the episodes with Clovis. And the episodes with Mina Bonteri. For Queen's Peril, it was the Phantom Menace itself, and also a kind of like, because they were so young, I wanted to keep it still sort of teenagery while remembering that they were all very young, and so it was probably the most like high schoolish book, which makes sense because they're like 14 and down, like they're not very old in that book. And then for Queen's Hope, it was mostly just Attack of the Clones and the stuff I knew was already coming thanks to Greg Pak's comic books, because they had come out while I was editing. So I was able to make some changes based on these books. There's also even a couple of nods to High Republic in Queen's Hope, because Queen's Hope I finished writing Queen's Hope a year ago. So when I was editing, I had some time to like work some stuff in, which was really good. And there's always going to be nods to Claudia Gray books because she writes Leia. So there we are. And it's kind of, I was joking like the other day, it's like you can take the Star Wars plot off of Tatooine, but you can't take the Star Wars plot off of Tatooine. And so even though Book of Boba Fett aired after I was finished, like the book was printed, it was stuck on a boat in California. There's something that happens in the Book of Boba Fett that I'm like, that's mine now, John. It is mine. I will take it from here. Don't worry. I got it covered. We're good to go. And because it is quite feasibly in Queen's Hope, which is delightful.
That's so interesting. Everything connecting accidentally. Wow. Trying to think. I know this could feel like maybe picking between children, but which of the 3 books?
Oh boy. It does. I don't even have children to pick between, and this one's still hard. Oh man, probably Queen's Peril. And I think the reason for Queen's Peril is that it was me getting to write the original 5 Handmaidens. And also that's the book with the most Shmi Skywalker scenes. And I love writing Shmi Skywalker scenes. So getting to actually write her and Padme interacting built off of what happens in the in the book, or in the movie rather, was really fun. So I think probably Queen's Peril. I had a fantastic time with Sasha and Yane and writing the occupation, which sounds really weird, but like slotting it in around the movie events. I come from a fan fiction history, so like that's how I learned to write, was like working around scenes that were on the television. And so Queen's Peril was basically me going back to this movie and turning the camera in another direction or going to another scene while the camera was with Padme, and that was super fun.
How many times did you watch Phantom Menace?
A lot. So I have seen, well, the best part was Disney Plus had come out like right before, while I was drafting. No, it's while I was doing my first round of revisions. Disney Plus had dropped. And I think I was like, should I put it in as a business expense? I don't know. And then like literally the first week of Disney Plus existing, I watched Phantom Menace, or at least the Battle of Naboo part of Phantom Menace, at least 3 times a day, because I was trying to track the handmaidens. 2 of them switch groups, which is a little bit awkward. Yeah. And it's Irrite too. So it's like the blonde one, the one that sticks out. So they switch groups a lot, and I had to come up with ways to like remember where everybody was. And like at one point I was like watching the movie and taking notes in the draft as I was going down, and like it was super fun. And it was a business expense, so I didn't mind Disney Plus being a business expense.
There you go.
Disney Plus should have like a thing of like how many times you watch this certain thing.
I'm really kind of glad it doesn't, because I think I've watched DuckTales like 9 times through in its entirety, and there doesn't need to be a record of that anywhere in my personal data. Like I'm good with not.
Was it Netflix that did that thing the one year that's like, this person watched the Bee Movie like this many times?
Yeah.
Disney Plus could drop that and just ruin everyone.
Ruin everyone's life.
Oh man. I'm trying to think. I can't think of any more questions. You had such good answers.
Thanks.
And I would be like, oh, like you'd say something like, oh, there's a question, and then you answered the question. Yeah, do you have anything you want to add? Anything you want to say about Queen's Hope?
Not really. I put so much, like, as cheesy as it sounds, I put a lot of heart into this book, just because like I was really sad when I wrote it, like really sad when I wrote it. And at first, like, so I was really sad when I wrote it, so I put in like all this hugely self-indulgent stuff. And then of course spent like 6 months being like, oh God, did I like put too much in this book for myself? Like, did I just ruin it by like putting in too much for myself? But now that people are starting to read it and they're reacting exactly the way I was hoping they would react to the things I loved, that it's just been incredible. And that's just the early readers. So like the book hasn't even gone out to like more than 100 people yet, I don't think. So I'm just so happy with the early reception, and I know that it will just like reach more people the same way, and that just makes me happy.
That's so exciting. I'm sure that anticipation is killing you for the official release. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem.
I'm so excited to have you. Everyone, make sure you get Queen's Hope when it comes out, and if you haven't read the first 2, read them too. They're just amazing Padme books, but also just amazing Star Wars books and amazing books in general. They're just so good.
Thank you for the books.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my God.
Them.
Yeah, thank you.
Like earlier when I said like the reason these books exist is because people want them. Like every time there's a Padme book announced, some dude is always like, nobody asked for another Padme book. I'm like, no, but they did. I have the numbers to prove it.
We have the evidence.
And that's why I got to write 3 of them, right? Like I convinced them to let me write 1, and then I convinced them to let me write 2, and then they were like, do you want to write a 3rd one? I was like, yeah. And it's because of the readers, like absolutely because of readers. So it's just been fantastic to do this with everybody.
They're so good. I guess we can do our plugs. I know you're on social media things, if you want to plug your things.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at EK_Johnston, which is also my Instagram and my TikTok, where I am very intermittently. On Tumblr, there is no underscore because they don't let you do underscores on Tumblr, but it's still EK Johnston with a T.
Yes. We'll do Star Wars Geek Girl stuff real fast. Facebook page is Star Wars Geek Girl, Twitter and Instagram at SW Geek Girl. We don't have a TikTok. We're not cool enough yet, I guess. We also have StarWarsGeekGirl.com where I post book reviews. I'm going to reread the Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril before Queen's Hope comes out, so there'll be reviews that I write for all those, and then we also do like blog articles and things like that. Yeah, thank you again so much. Wish I had more
Thank you so much
questions,
for having me.
but you're so good. It's very amazing answers. I was already excited. Now I'm so much more excited for this book to come out.
I was
almost a month.
Yeah, I was doing the math, Lizzie, and like we met almost exactly 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Like your brother is much taller now, which is like my metric. But I was like, because Lissa sent me the thing, and I was like, is that like Rebels, Lizzie? She's old enough to have her own podcast now. So I was just super happy to talk to you guys.
Yeah, I'm an adult now. I used to be a child for Rebels. I'm gonna turn 20 in like a few days.
Oh
a week,
goodness.
2 weeks. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing long time. And
It has been.
Remember was the other day, and
yes, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Will you be at Celebration Anaheim?
Yes, barring some new travel advisory, I will be at Celebration Anaheim. They just released their like health and safety today, and I was okay, I'll come. Like,
yeah.
So that did make me feel a lot better. Mostly because I know like the kids at Celebration have so much fun. Like I've never been to a convention where the children have so much fun, and I'm glad that we're creating a safe area for them to come and do Star Wars. And me too, but also children.
I remember Axel running around and making a lot of friends during those conventions.
Yeah.
But yeah. What day is Celebration? Do we know the day?
I have absolutely no idea. It's like Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, it's like Memorial Day weekend. Because I remember Celebration, I think it was Chicago it was Orlando was Easter weekend. And I was like, that's weird. Why did you do it on a holiday weekend? But it was really
Orlando was Easter.
Yeah.
Chicago was the middle of nothing, and it was just really cold.
Yeah, this is the 26th through the 29th of
Is that Memorial Day weekend?
I think so. I don't have Memorial Day written down on my calendar, but I have Star Wars Celebration written down on my calendar.
I don't really know when Memorial Day is, but it feels like
that's where it is.
It's after Kenobi comes out.
Yes. Yeah. Super exciting. I'm sure we'll see plenty of Obi-Wans. For sure. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you at Celebration, and I will definitely we said this before we were recording. EK was with Holly Fry at Celebration Orlando, and I read, I think Ahsoka was out by then.
Yeah.
So I'd read it, so like I knew who you were and I loved the book, but I didn't like recognize you. Like my brain just didn't process it. But I was like, oh my God, Holly Fry! Like I've podcasted with her. I know her. I was talking to Holly, and you were right there. And I will say hi to you this time. I promise. I will actually say hi.
Excellent.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you again so much for being on the show and talking about your books. And I'm super excited.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
Thank you for being part of our lives for so long.
Yeah, we'll sign off. I was Zoe.
I was Lizzie.
And I'm still Kate.
Thank you for listening to Star Wars Geek Girl. May the force be with you, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Star Wars Geek Girls. They're geek girls that like Star Wars. And sometimes cry.